evening. Now, for some of you, maybe you want to give a who day. Anybody a who day? You know, and some of you want to give a who cares, right? So who cares? All right. Welcome to the crossing. Thanks for coming out. And I just wanted to kind of start with just a couple things. First of all, 2 weeks ago, I made an ask, again, if you were here this last weekend or the weekend before, to ask people to step up and to volunteer to serve and work with our children's ministry. And I announced the first weekend we had 51 people step up and sign up. And now our grand total has grown to, I believe, over 60 people who have stepped up to serve with our kids. So thank you for that. And on the week I made the ask initially, I was preaching on gentleness, and we talked about how gentleness is basically strength under control. And I kind of threw it out there to the guys. I said, you know, if you're a teenage guy or if you're a man, we need more Mr. Rogers. We need more of that working with our children. And I'm proud to say that 19 men, more than the 10 we already had, 19 stepped up. So that's a third of the sign-ups were men. So I want to say thanks to you guys that stepped up. And here's the thing, I want you to know also that you will make a difference, and here's how I know how. I received a letter the weekend I kind of threw down the gauntlet and said, come on guys, do this. That very next day I got a letter from a single mom that attends this church, and she sent me this letter, and I asked her if I could share it, and she said of course, but I've taken out her name and her child's name, but I want you to hear what she had to say. She said, thank you for your call to action among the men. I cried the whole drive home because it was like you stood on stage and spoke my cries to the Lord. It is really hard being a single mom and knowing my ex-husband doesn't care about Jesus and pouring faith into our son. It's my constant struggle to find positive males to surround him so he can see how wonderful God is and how manly it is to pursue Jesus. So thank you for speaking that, and know that I'm praying my heart out in agreement that the Lord moves through those words to awaken men who will build into kids who may not be their flesh and blood, but who desperately need that male figure pointing them to God. So it matters, guys. It matters. And so thanks for stepping up. If you're here and you're hearing this for the first time and you want to serve, you can find Sarah on any Sunday or go back to the preschool area and just say, hey, I'm here to help, or I'd like to find out how to help, and I'm sure they will get you plugged in. Last week, we kind of finished up our series on Believe, and Brandon spoke on humility. And it's interesting because as he spoke on humility last week, I kind of wanted to begin this week by basically humbly just kind of stating that, you know, I think we didn't make the greatest of choices. And so I kind of want to humbly come to you and say, sorry about that, and I'll tell you why. We've been promoting this new series as Fake News. All right? And all along our intention when we set this up way back at the beginning of the year is for Fake News to be, to talk about all those emails. You know those emails you get where you need to rescue a prince from South Africa and you know, Instagram, or these stories that you see on Facebook that you forward on and send 15 of these and you'll be blessed tomorrow. And that was our whole idea, is all these conspiracy theories and social media articles and chain letters are they're believable. That's why we do it, but they're fake. But here's the problem, and this is what was brought to our attention, is the phrase fake news has become so supercharged in our community these days, or in our nation, that there's a lot of different emotions that are associated with it. The term fake news has become, as I say, politicized, weaponized, and supersized as far as a term that really does get under some people's skin. Our president uses that phrase, fake news, usually in all caps, almost every day when he tweets. As a matter of fact, President Trump has actually claimed to be the one who came up with fake news, which I want you to know I did some research on that, and that's fake news. He did not. It came out actually before him. But now before you check out or say, oh great, it's a political thing or whatever, first of all, that is not a slam on our president just because I made that little comment. I'm not tipping our hand of how I believe or our political persuasion. That is not the point of what I'm about to say. Our concern as a leadership is this. If you've attended this church for weeks or months, then you know that we have never preached politics from this stage. We have never done it. Our political affiliation, our supporting a candidate, and this church has existed through 2 presidential elections, 2 presidential primaries, and we have never talked politics. I have many friends who are elected officials, some of them who actually attend this church. And so don't get me wrong, I'm registered, I always vote, and I do have a political opinion. It's just to hear it, you're going to have to ask me about it off this stage. So if you want to know, just ask. But I can tell you that I nor any leaders will ever stand up here and use this stage, this pulpit, to try to sway or influence the way you vote. The only thing we care about when we step on this stage is that if you're going to make a choice, it's going to be Jesus. That's all we care about. And so our goal is to influence you. And so here's the great thing about that. As I say that, for some of you who've just got here, just check this out. We have like 7 years worth of sermons, 2 times a week, now 3 times a week because of Thursday nights, where you can go fact check me on that. If you want to watch 7 years worth of sermons, you can find out that this is true. The only thing we push around here is the good news of Jesus. And anyone who's been around the crossing for any length of time knows that. But here's the problem that we've realized. Our concern is there are a lot of people in our community or circles of friends that you have that don't know that. They just see it on social media that a church is doing fake news. And they just read the phrase and automatically associate it with a president, an agenda, or a political persuasion and decide, nope, not going to that church. And for all those who right now are still thinking, man, you're letting the PC police get to you, and I think you're making a big deal out of this, and you're caving into pressure. Well, let me just tell you, our next series we're doing is Just Do It. I'm going to come out in a Nike shirt, and we'll see if that doesn't maybe offend the other crowd that's here today. You see what I'm saying? It's amazing how we could have done a series on Just Do It, all about action and evangelism and going out and taking risks, and we could have had that on the calendar, and all of a sudden, just because of what's happened in the last 2 weeks, it will have become a firestorm of just a simple phrase and just a simple logo. And see, here's the thing. Because fake news has become a phrase that could be divisive or alienate people from hearing the good news, we've decided to change fake news to false news. Now you think, well, that's not a big change. It is a big change, because it's not the problem was the basic behind it. The problem is fake news has just become a negative phrase. And so we've changed that. But the point I want to make before we begin is that here's the thing. We exist as a church to draw people to Jesus, period. So anything we ever do, good intention, well-intentioned or not, that might divide, repel, or cause anyone to say, nope, never going there, then if we ever do that, then we have lost the whole purpose and mission of why we exist. Because the people we exist for aren't even here yet. And if we ever do anything, even unintentionally, that might alienate or divide or create, cut us off from half of our community, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And so, as your lead pastor of the Crossing, whether you saw a problem with it or not, I'm humbly asking for your forgiveness, because we didn't think it through. Because, again, we exist to draw all men and all women and all children to Christ and Christ alone, period. And we've always been a safe place for everyone to come as you are, no matter your political persuasion, no matter where you stand on issues, no matter that it is a safe place for you to come and learn about Christ. So, that's the thing. So for those of you it was fake news for the last 6 weeks, we've been saying fake news, fake news, fake news. Now you know why we've changed it to false news. Because we didn't want to do anything that would prevent people from actually hearing the good news. So, having said all that, welcome to the new series, False News.
Thank God you're all right.
God, yeah, let's thank God, shall we? For his blessings are raining down upon me. Wait, that's not rain!
Bruce, please don't do that, honey. You know that everything happens for a reason.
That I don't need. That is a cliche. That is not helpful to me. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. I have no bird. I have no bush. God has taken my bird and my bush.
Oh, I see. So God is picking on you? Is that what you're saying?
No, he's ignoring me completely. He's far too busy giving Evan everything he wants. Oh, that's great, Sam. But you missed your target. I'm over here.
Don't get mad at the dog. It's not the dog's fault.
No, it's God's fault. I gave him the wrong coordinates.
All right, you know what? Enough. All right, will you just stop being such a martyr?
I am not being a martyr. I'm a victim. God is a mean kid sitting on an anthill with a magnifying glass, and I'm the ant. He could fix my life in 5 minutes if he wanted to, but he'd rather burn off my feelers and watch me squirm.
All right, sweetheart, I know that you're mad. It's completely understandable. What Evan did is slimy and wrong. But this day could have been so much worse. I'm just glad you're okay.
Okay? Newsflash. I'm not okay. I'm not okay with a mediocre job. I'm not okay with a mediocre apartment. I'm not okay with a mediocre life.
So has anybody ever heard the phrase, after a really bad day or after maybe a tragic situation, where someone tried to spin it or use the very comforting phrase, well, you know, everything happens for a reason? Did it work? Did it comfort you? Did it feel a little bit hollow or maybe a little bit inappropriate for the moment? Maybe it didn't quite reach the level of seriousness of the moment? You know, it's interesting. That's a phrase that not only we've heard a lot, but quite honestly, we probably have said it. And when we've said it, we did mean it with good intentions. We did mean it to bring comfort to someone. But what happens is it's a phrase that we use. It's a cliche or it's a platitude. And it has some different cousins. It kind of has some spiritual cousins to everything happens for a reason, like it was God's will, or God has a plan, or everything will work out, and so on. And so everything happens for a reason. I kind of want to talk about that today or tonight, that phrase, because while it sounds good and while it sounds spiritual, the question is it really biblical? And if it is, where in the world did that quote come from? Now, if you've read the scriptures and you've seen things, there's passages that you're thinking, it could. I mean, we talked about Joseph a couple weeks ago and how Joseph had a lot of bad things happen to him. His brothers sold him out and he got in slavery and they went to prison and all that stuff. Well, then eventually they come to him and they realize finally who he is. And then they're like begging and apologizing to him. And Genesis 50, basically he says, you know what, you planned for evil against me, God used for the good. So maybe that's kind of a variation of that. I would guess that the source probably comes from Romans 8:28. That's just my hunch, okay? Romans 8:28, many of you know this or you've heard it. It's, we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and who are called according to his purposes. And here's why I think that's kind of maybe it is. I kind of wrote this down, and you'll see it up here on the screen, is all things, that's everything, works together, happens, according to his purpose, which is for a reason. So God has a purpose for everything, and all things seem to just work together. And I kind of can see how it happens, because if you were ever kids where you played the telephone game, and I think now they even have a board game, like I think it's called Telestrator or whatever, where basically you start with one thing, and then it makes its way down the line, and before it's all over it with, you hear something totally different. So I could kind of see where Romans 8:28, where we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and according to his purposes, could very easily over time just become, hey, everything happens for a reason. It's all in God's plan. It's all God's will. But here's the problem with that. If you say everything happens for a reason, and you're basically meaning that there is a cause and effect of everything, because that's true, there is a cause and effect. If I do this or that, there is a cause and effect of everything. If that's what you mean by that, then yeah, there's truth to that. Everything happens for a reason, because there's a cause and effect. But the reality is, most of the time when we hear that phrase, it's not about cause and effect, it's about comfort. It's about a spiritual pep talk. It's about trying to encourage someone. To help them through this very difficult trial. In other words, don't worry about getting fired. God has something better in store for you. All things work together for the good, remember? Oh, your spouse is cheating on you? Hey, be encouraged, because everything happens for a reason. You know, that worked. You have a terminal diagnosis, you've lost a child, there's been a head-on collision, a miscarriage, bankruptcy, divorce, you name it. Everything happens for a reason. God has a plan. It must be his will. Any of those times we bring that in to those scenarios, it kind of, it's hollow. It's very hollow. And while these words are intended to bring comfort, what they end up usually doing is bringing a crisis, a spiritual crisis. A crisis of faith. Just let me give you some examples of what everything happens for a reason does. If we believe that everything happens for a reason, or we say that everything happens for a reason, here's the first thing it does. It completely relieves us from all personal responsibility. If we say everything happens for a reason, then I'm not responsible for everything, because everything else is doing it. God has a plan for whatever happens. It was his will. if God has a plan or a place for my life, then my choices really don't matter because I'm just going to roll with it because he has a plan, he has a choice. If everything happens for a reason, then it's not my fault I failed my biology test. It must have been God's will. It must have been his plan. It must have been God's plan that I overslept and showed up for work 3 days this week late. And it must be, God, I'm telling my boss, I think God's just saying I need more rest. God keeps allowing my coworkers to bring in Marcella's donuts, so this diet is obviously not in his will. It is not his plan for me. You see, if everything happens for a reason and it's all on God, then guess what? It's not my fault. I can just pin it on him. It's all his doing. The other thing that when he say everything happens for a reason is when you see what all these things there that are happening, and they all it all happens for a reason, this is all God's doing, then it really paints a pretty disturbing picture of God. I mean, have you ever thought about that? I mean, as Bruce said in his clip, God is some mean kid with a magnifying glass shining his sun on these ants and watching them squirm. But if God causes everything to happen for a reason, then what is the reason for Hurricane Florence right now churning off of the coast of Carolina? What is the reason for that? Why didn't he stop the shooter that went into Cincinnati and stop that? What in the world could be his will or plan in all that? Tornadoes, wildfires, flooding, they all cause great damage of life. And I do think it's interesting that even our insurance companies call those things what? Acts of God. So see, even they blame him. It was an act of God. Every time there's a rape, a murder, child abuse, every war, every child that dies of starvation, it's all God's plan. It's all in his will. Everything happens for a reason. If you're saying that and you're seeing all that, I mean, come on, does that really sound good? I mean, it makes God sound like a monster. A horrible, horrible deity. And then everything happens for a reason can lead to fatalism, which is kind of this belief that everything is already planned out, it's already fixed in advance, so we're powerless to change them. It's que sera, whatever will be, will be. It's just going to happen, and we're powerless to change what happens in life, so why even try? Because God has already picked out who's going to win the Super Bowl, and we know it's not going to be the Bengals, so why rush home and waste your time watching this game, right? Because it's just not going to happen. It's already been planned. We're doomed to fail all the time. That's just it. So why work out and take care of my body? Because when it's my time to go, it's my time to go, whether I'm in shape or not. If I've been diagnosed with cancer, why go through the medication? If that's the way God was going to take me out, why fight it? Why wear a seatbelt? Why? It just creates this fatalism. And so whether the statement creates a fatalism side or that he's a cruel God or, hey, it's not my fault, it's God. Every time, all of those things, it places all the blame squarely on God. It places all the responsibility squarely on him. But here's the thing. When you study the Bible and actually read it, what you're going to see is that is all false news. I mean, yes, I realize God is in control, but God also gives us free will. He gives us an opportunity to make choices. So unless you see some puppet strings right now, then what I'm about to say is probably some is going to be from God, but there's probably some that's going to be coming from Kenny White too. It's the bad parts. If there's bad parts of what I'm about to say, that's from me. The good parts, that's from God. But the reality is, we can't pin the blame of everything happening on God. We just can't do it. Because the reality is some things happen, and some of the bad things that happen are just self-inflicted wounds. They're things that we have brought upon ourselves. Or someone said this, everything does happen for a reason, but sometimes the reason is you're stupid and you make bad decisions. So yeah, everything happens for a reason. In the opening chapters of Genesis, God basically places a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he says, don't eat from that one. You can eat from all the others, including the tree of life. You can eat all this, just don't eat from that one. But Adam and Eve, they chose to eat from that one. And because they chose to eat from that one, then it was going to separate them from the tree of life, separate them from God. Therefore, they were going to die. But that was their choice. They had a choice. They could have went God's way, but they chose to do their own thing and go their own separate way. And even Adam, I think, is interesting. Even Adam tried to blame God. In Genesis 3, verses 8 through 12, when he's kind of confronting Adam and Eve, Adam says, it was the woman who you gave me. It was your idea. If you didn't give me her, I probably would still be in the garden right now. But you gave her to me, and so it's her fault. So see, we're still very much like our very distant relative Adam, in the sense that when we make sinful decisions, when we make bad, sinful decisions, and all hell breaks loose in our life, we want to say, where are you, God? Why are you doing this to me? When the reality is we're so much like Adam, because what we're really doing is we made the choice that put us in the situation we're in, but yet we want to blame him because things aren't turning out the way they should. So we're still so much like Adam. And we continue to choose sin over obedience to God. And because of that, our world is always going to get worse. It's going to get sicker. We're going to have more sickness. We're going to have more disease. We're going to have more death. And because this world isn't functioning the way God designed it because of all the sin and all the decisions we made, then yes, there's going to be things that are going to happen in nature and catastrophes that wasn't God's initial plan. And we see it time and time again, and over again in the Bible, God calls us to choose his way or to go our way. And when we go our way, the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And so when we go our way, that's what we're going to get, is destruction. We're going to get death. But when we go his way, we get life. We get freedom. We can listen to his voice, or we can ignore it and go our way. But when that happens, when we disobey God, when we willfully disobey God, then we can't shake our fist at him and say, well, where were you? This was your plan? Everything happens for a reason. The other reason is things do happen is because we live in a broken world, as I just said. And because we live in a fallen world, you can do the best you can to try to be obedient. You can do the best you can to try to follow his will. But someone in your house, someone on your street, someone in your workplace, someone on the other side of the globe isn't. And they aren't. And so we live in a fallen world, and so someone else makes decisions, or there's things that happen that creates this domino effect that has consequences as to why we suffer. And it wasn't the result of your doing. It's the result of the doing of others in this sinful and fallen world we live in. So because of that, an innocent family could be completely taken out by a drunk driver. Not by their decisions, but by someone else's. This whole thing, someone shows up for work in downtown Cincinnati. They're just going to work. They're just where they're supposed to be. But because there is this troubled soul who, for whatever reason, chooses to kill, steal, and destroy. In a fallen world, accidents happen. And it just happens. Sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes tree limbs fall on people for no apparent reason. Sometimes a tractor trailer's tire can blow out and go across the median and take out a bus. And just like that, lives are gone. You could be on vacation and a riptide current can pull you or your family out to sea, and your vacation is now done. A mudslide, flash flooding, no warning. You see, we live in a world where bad things happen. But we can't say God's behind the bad things. That was never his plan. I mean, if you read anything about the scripture, you can't say, well, that's God. God's doing it. God's doing all that bad stuff. Because any reading of the scriptures, you know that what comes up time and time again is he loves us. God is love. He is love. And he is rooted in love. And if there's anything that's happening that is not rooted in love and it's rooted in evilness, you can't say that's God. Because God is love. And sometimes things happen for a reason, not because we make sinful choices, but because we make dumb ones. For example, we invest all that we have on an up-and-coming stock because our Uncle Joe gave us a hunch. And he got that hunch from down at the lodge on Friday night after someone threw back 3 beers. And so I invested everything I got all on my Uncle Joe's word, who got it from this, from that, from that. You know, there's a whole award system called Darwin's Awards. You know, these aren't sinful decisions, but these are stupid decisions. You know what I'm saying? I mean, hey, let's get in the pool and plug in our stuff and just float it on something or other. Yeah, that's smart. Let's tee off, off of someone's rear end. And there's so many others where it's just crazy. If you just ever want to Google Darwin Award winners, you'd be amazed. But sometimes bad things happen not because you're sinful, you're just stupid. You're just doing something foolish. And sometimes it could be even something, while these are funny, we laugh, with this hurricane churning down, my wife has some friends that are older, and they have a home in the south side of Myrtle Beach. And while their adult children are begging and pleading and begging, saying, get out of there, leave, they're like, no, we're good, we're gonna ride it out. That's their decision. It's not a sinful decision, but I can tell you if it ends up being a foolish one, it's going to create a domino effect. And it's going to impact not only them, but their family, and on and on and on. It wasn't a sinful decision, it was just a foolish one. And we can't blame God for the foolish decisions we make. I can imagine God saying, oh, no, don't pin that on me. Don't you dare. No, that was stupid. Don't pin that on me. God loves us, but he's not going to jump up and rescue us from every stupid, foolish decision we make. As a preacher once said, the good news isn't that God is working behind the scenes to make sure every dumb and non-thought-out decision is fixed. The good news is that no matter what the repercussions are from your ill-conceived ideas, he is continuously working for our good, no matter how many bird-brain decisions we make along the way. In other words, he's going to be there, but don't hang it on him. So it's important that we clear this up. This false news of everything happens for a reason, or blame God for everything that happens for a reason, whether it's well-intentioned or not, because we have to clear this up, because it is creating spiritual harm. It's just like that little nuance of changing it from fake news to false news. It could alienate people from wanting to even be a part of a church or a part of this or that. And when we make those kind of statements, really, even well-intentioned, if you make those kind of statements when someone's going through a tragedy, and it ends up sounding like you're saying God's got this and this has all happened for a reason, then it's going to make people very, very angry at God. And many of you probably have met people who are very, very angry at God because of something that happened. And sometimes it's because of the way we present it. And so it makes them angry, and so it alienates them, and it drives them away from God. When we tell them he had a plan, it was his will, and everything happened for a reason, it leaves them blaming and resenting God. It leaves them all alone trying to figure out then why. Why did this happen? And to be honest, some people are so mad that if this was God's plan, then to be quite honest, I'd rather take my chances in hell than spend eternity in heaven with that guy, with that deity. You see how dangerous it is when we use such a simple phrase? So as I wrap it up, let's just look a little bit more closely at this passage that we tend to take and break it down. When we know all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. I want you just to see what it really says, because we've memorized it, but I think we've missed the nuance of this. It doesn't say that everything that happens is good. It simply says God is at work in all things. It also isn't referring to everyone. This promise isn't for everyone. Although we'd love to assign it to everyone, it's not for everyone. It's for only those who love him and are called. So you can't even say that this promise is for everyone, because it's not for everyone. It's for those who have the distinction of being believers. And so God is working together for the good of those who love him, those who are called his followers. And that then, when you realize that it's being said to a follower of Jesus, then this is why it is such a sweet statement. Because the good that's described in this passage doesn't mean good as in my personal comfort. Things are always going to be good. Things are going to always. It's always going to work out good. Everything I do, all the decisions I make, it's always going to be good. That's not the good he's talking about. He's not talking about our interpretation of good, which is usually what's in it for me, what makes me comfortable. He's talking about the ultimate good. The good that is promised to us because of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He's talking about, God's going to be with us through all these things that are happening. But when he's saying good, he's talking about the good that's yet to come. You may lose your job as a believer, and you may get it back, and you may not. But ultimately, the redemptive hope that we have in Jesus Christ, that's what's so good. Matter of fact, it's very good. And so Romans 8:28, we have to understand this, is less about being made good in our circumstances, but the bad things in our lives being made good when it comes to our standing in God's eyes. Is we're made good in his eyes. And Jesus is the perfect example of this passage of something working for the good. Because I don't think Jesus would have thought going through all he went through to get to the crucifixion was good at all. It's not good at all. But it was according to God's plan, his purpose. It wasn't good for him in the moment, but we do know that God took something bad and produced something so much better out of it. And the good that comes from that, you think, well, that seems selective. No, we go all right back to the beginning. You have a choice. You want to be that? You want that promise to be for you? That everything that happens might not always be good, but I know one day it's going to be real good because of Jesus Christ. You have a choice. The only thing that's keeping you from making that choice is you. And every one of us can make that choice. You can choose Jesus' sacrifice as becoming the ultimate good for where you stand with God, or you can choose your own way, which will lead to death. That's how it worked out for Adam and Eve. I came across this article written by Ben Wetherington, who's a professor, and it was in this article in Christianity Today in April 2012. And I just kind of want to share this because it kind of brings us back to where you normally hear this, everything happens for a reason. It's usually in the case of a death. And he wrote this article called What Good Grief Looks Like When a Daughter Dies. He says the phone rang late Wednesday night near the beginning of the new year on January 11th of 2012. And it was Christy's boyfriend. He was barely intelligible because he was crying so hard. He had just been on the phone with the Durham Police Department in North Carolina, and the words he spoke were, "She's gone. She was found dead in the house. Your daughter Christy has passed away." Now, because we were in Lexington, Kentucky, we had no family within 500 miles of us. So we called our dear friends, Bill and Susan Arnold, who stayed and prayed with us until midnight. And I just want to interrupt this story because this would probably not have been the time to say, you know what, everything works out for a reason. God has a plan. I'm not so sure that would have been very impactful at that moment. But he says, finally, after they left, we lay down in our bed, trying to comprehend the reality until dawn, and my heart was pounding, my breath was short, and we both cried and we both prayed. Every parent's worst nightmare had come to pass. So many thoughts and feelings run through your head and heart when you get a call like that. My mind darted instantly as I'm replaying how we'd just seen her 11 days before on December 31st as she was leaving to go south. I started thinking of the time when I held her at her birth in Durham, England. And she is gone. She is gone from this earth until the resurrection. And until then, she will not come back except in the form of our memories. So he asked the question, was this God's will? From the day Christy died, I was determined to be open to whatever positive thing might be gleaned from this seeming tragedy. And I clung to the promise of Romans 8:28 that God works all things for good to those who love him. He says the first point immediately confirmed in my heart was theological. And this is what his point was. God did not do this to my child. God is not the author of evil. God does not terminate sweet lives with pulmonary embolisms. Pulmonary embolisms are a result of the bent and fallen nature of this world. And my wife, Ann, kept repeating, God is not the problem. He is the solution. God is not the problem. He is the solution. And then he says the beginning of good grief starts with the premise of a good God. Otherwise, all bets are off. If God is almighty and hostile or malevolent or cruel, then there is no solace to be found in him. If God is the author of sin, evil, suffering, the fall, and death, then the Bible makes no sense when it tells us that God tempts no one, that God's will is that none should perish but have everlasting life, and that death is the very enemy of God and humankind, that Jesus, who is life, came to abolish and destroy. He says, Jesus said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly, in John 10:10. If there are promises I cling to as I weep for our Christy, it is that promise. Not the sorry solace and cold comfort of God did this, but we don't know why. Nope, 1,000 times no. God and his will are aligned with what is good and true and beautiful and loving and holy. And so days later, as I stood before the casket and I stared out at our Christy, I was so thankful that the God of the resurrection had a better plan for her. Her lifeless body was so cold, so empty, the phrase, it's God's will, is cold comfort. I believe in a God whose yes to life is louder than death's no. Death is not God's will. On the contrary, God is in the trenches with us, fighting the very same evils we fight in this world: disease, suffering, sorrow, sin, and death itself. He cries with us. So here's the bottom line. God has promised us that everything will work out in this life. He hasn't promised that. He didn't say everything's going to be smooth sailing, everything's going to be great, everything's going to be fine. Once you become a believer, it's great. He didn't say that. But what he did say in Hebrews 13 is he promises that no matter what happens, he will never leave or forsake us. God is not the reason everything happens, but Hebrews 13:5 promises that when everything happens, he's always with us. So if you are in relationship with Jesus Christ, then through the good, through the bad, through the tragic, through the joyful, through the sad, God is always with you when it's happening. He's always there. So can we stop saying the false news that everything happens for a reason? Can we stop pinning the blame of everything that happens on God and realize that a lot of what's happening is our choices? It's the fallen world. It's the foolishness of man. Because he's not to blame. He loves us. And he put a plan in place to redeem us so that we can get back to that paradise that we send our way out of. That's the plan he has. And through Jesus' sacrifice, then all things will work together for the good, and it'll be very good of those who love God. And that is not false news. That is good news. And so I'm going to pray, and I'm just going to kind of leave it open. If you want to pray, there will be people that will meet you around the cross. If you're here and you're doing this world without Jesus, then bad things are happening to you, just like bad things are happening to people who are with Jesus. But the difference is he's not with you. And he promises to be with you and to never forsake you. And man, that's a promise I would sure want to capitalize on. So if you're here and you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, then come up here and let's talk about that. Let's take care of that. So he can be with you as everything is happening. So let me pray. God, thank you.